The next animation that I want to do here is an attack combo from a player character perspective. So let's say you're playing this game and you're mashing buttons and you want your character to do a light attack and a medium attack and a heavy attack, and we're going to string them all together in this animation. There's a couple of things that we need to think about before we do anything, and I thought maybe I'd talk quickly about the difference between the player animation and the enemy animation, because there's a little bit of a difference. In our case, and in all cases really, the player character's animation needs to be responsive. Attacks need to happen quickly, they have to be efficient. Typically these would be dictated by the game designer in terms of how long this animation is. But they should look cool, they should look powerful. Our poses should be clear and strong and all that good stuff. Now, the enemy animation, in our case, we're going to talk about the enemy hit reaction to this attack. The enemy animation is there to provide feedback. I don't care how cool and how awesome your player character's attack is, if the enemy doesn't react to it, it's going to feel like a wet noodle, right? So if you have that really strong attack, you have to have that really strong reaction. The enemy animation is there to provide feedback. Okay, so we talked about player animation versus the enemy animation. Let's talk about a few of the other things you have to think about in terms of planning before tackling this kind of a shot. So the first thing to think about is this attack combo probably in most cases would be done in separate animations. And what I mean by that is you would have an animation for a light attack and an animation for a medium attack and a third animation for, say, a heavy attack. We're going to put these all together into one attack, but generally each one of these needs to flow into the next. And that's what I mean about planning in terms of these separate animations. They need to be able to flow one into the other. Typically, they would be separate, but they would go into and out of, say, some sort of combat idle. And we'll go into that a little bit more detail later. So we've talked about player animations needing to be responsive. Well, what that means is these actions, these attacks, really have very few frames that we can use to create that animation. So our attacks are not going to have a lot of anticipation. You're not going to sit there and wait for the player character to, bring his arm back, in anticipation of bringing it forward to hit the enemy. But what we can do in some cases is build that anticipation into forward movement. That's kind of one tool that we can use to our advantage when we're dealing with a limited amount of frames. Something else that we would think about in terms of planning would be research. YouTube is an animator's best friend. You can find just about anything that you want on YouTube somewhere, and that will give you some pretty good reference footage to go over for your shot. Other things are image searches if you're looking for particular poses, that kind of thing. Often I will record myself on video or record others on video if I'm looking to do something very specific and I'm just trying to figure out the body mechanics. How does the body move from one way, one pose to another pose, that sort of thing. Another thing in terms of planning is to think about the character's personality. This will actually give you an extra layer to your animation and kind of separate you from the pack. Is your character really confident? Is your character weak? Is your character injured? Is your character a show-off? Or is your character super efficient and emotionless? These kinds of things, if you can build that into your animation, will really separate you from a lot of other animators. The last thing that I'll mention in terms of planning would be creating poses. Sometimes you can actually save a lot of time by just sketching out your poses, making little thumbnails, quick drawings, just to see how one pose flows into the next pose before you actually jump into Maya. Because if you jump into Maya before you really have a good solid understanding of what you're going to do, you can waste a lot of time posing and moving a rig around to find that this doesn't work. It's not looking right. It would look better if I did this. And well, no, now this doesn't work with what I did before and that sort of thing. So again, planning, a lot of this stuff happens before you get into Maya so that once you jump into Maya, you're ready to go and things move much, much quicker.